The HOA called 911 on me at my own ranch gate before I even stepped out of my truck. I drove 12 hours back to my family ranch, only to have patrol cars block my gate and accuse me of trespassing on my own land. But within hours, I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. They thought I was just another rancher they could push around, not the man who oversees HOAs across the entire country. And when they chained my water gate at midnight, I knew the real fight had begun. By the time I turned off the highway onto the dirt lane, the sun was already dropping behind the Wyoming range. 12 hours of driving still buzzed in my bones. I rolled the window down and let in cold air that smelled like sagebrush and dust. For a few seconds it was just me and open pasture. Then red and blue lights flashed across the windshield. 2 county cruisers sat sideways across the lane, blocking the road to my gate. Their light bars washed the fence posts and scrub in stuttering color. Past them, my grandfather's gate stood where it had always been. Rough-cut timbers, iron hinges, the old hand-painted sign that read, Cole Ranch, Ist, 1953. Tonight those letters were drowned in police light. I eased off the gas and let the truck roll to a stop, gravel popping under my tires. This road had never been anything but ours. Seeing cruisers parked across it felt like finding a padlock on your own front door. I killed the engine and stepped down. The air bit through my jacket. Crickets buzzed in the ditch. Wind hissed along the wire. Cattle lowed somewhere in the dark. None of it sounded right under the sirens. The driver doors opened. One deputy was young and lanky, hat brim low, his hand close to his holster. The other was older, broad-shouldered, moving with the slow confidence of a man who'd seen too many late-night calls. His name tag caught my headlights. Harris. "Evening, officers," I said, keeping my hands visible. "Something going on?" The younger one glanced at Harris. "Sir, we got a call about a trespass in progress out here. We'll need you to step away from the vehicle." I frowned. "Trespass? On this road?" "Name?" Harris asked. "Remy Cole," I said. "This is my family's ranch." Those words had always been simple fact. Tonight they just hung in the cold air. Behind the cruisers, tires crunched on gravel. A white SUV eased around the bend and stopped at an angle, nose pointed toward my gate. The engine shut off. A woman stepped out like she was walking into a meeting instead of a ranch road. Bright pink suit, blonde bob, heels wrong for dirt. She hugged a leather folder to her chest and smiled like she'd already won. "There he is, Officer Harris," she called. "That's the man I reported. He's trespassing on HOA-controlled property. I want him removed, immediately." She pointed at me as if that settled it. "Ma'am," I said slowly, "I'm standing at the entrance to Cole Ranch." She let out a short laugh. "No, you're standing on Silver Creek Estates' common easement. This entrance corridor is under HOA jurisdiction. You can't just drive in without approval. There are rules." Harris's jaw tightened. "Ms. Reed, let us talk to him, all right?" So this was Bethany Reed. I'd seen her name before on complaint reports back in Washington, the kind that made their way to my desk when HOAs forgot they weren't governments. I hadn't expected to meet her on my own. Dirt. She ignored him and came closer, heels sinking into the dust. "I emailed you the documents," she told Harris. "The revised plat we filed with the county clearly shows this approach under Silver Creek control. His so-called gate," she flicked her chin toward my grandfather's work, "is unapproved. It has to go." "That gate's been there since the 50s, I said. "And Silver Creek's been here since 2009, she shot back. "Property lines change. Communities grow. Some people just can't accept that." The young deputy shifted his weight. "Sir, do you have any ID? Proof this is your property? Just to clear things up." I took a breath, letting the cold slow my temper. Out past the cruisers I could see the faint shape of the barn roof. the darker line of cottonwoods along the creek. My family had run cattle on this ground since long before any of those subdivision roofs existed. Yeah, I said. I've got proof. I reached for my back pocket, slow and deliberate, and pulled out my wallet. Behind my driver's license, folded and worn, was a copy of the county property card from my last tax payment. Old habit. People argue less with a parcel number in front of them. I handed the license and card to Harris. He unfolded the paper in the cruiser's headlights, eyes following the lines. You carry this around? He asked. Out here, sometimes the paper in your pocket matters more than the one on somebody's screen, I said. Bethany made a small, impatient sound. Those records are outdated, she said. The HOA filed a boundary adjustment. The clerk recorded it. Whatever he's showing you doesn't reflect current reality. Harris looked up. You're saying the county map is different from this card? I'm saying Silver Creek has invested a lot into maintaining this corridor, she answered smoothly. Dust control, grading, security. We can't have random men tearing it up with old ranch trucks and livestock trailers. It's a safety and property value issue. Our covenants are very clear. She said random men like she meant stray animals. I felt my jaw clench but kept my voice level. Nothing inside your subdivision is mine, Ms. Reed, and nothing on this side of that gate is yours. My grandfather bought this land in 1953. My father kept it running through drought and blizzards. I've paid taxes on every acre since he died. There's nothing random about me being here. The younger deputy looked from me to the sign on the gate. Harris studied the card again, then the fence line. You grow up out here? He asked. Born in the farmhouse behind those trees, I said. Learned to drive on this lane. If a line moved, it happened at a desk, not on the ground. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. People out here remember who was on the land before pavement. Bethany's patience snapped. Officer, this is unacceptable, she said. Silver Creek won't tolerate the sheriff's department and refusing to enforce our covenants. If he wants access, he files an architectural request like everyone else. Until then, he waits outside our controlled area. You want me to file an architectural request? I said, to drive onto my own ranch. Yes, she said. We review dust, noise, visual impact. Our homeowners paid for their views. Harris lifted his hand. That's enough, he said, firmer. You've made your position clear, Ms. Reed. But I'm not removing a man from land the county says his family owns because of a plat I haven't seen. You want to challenge records, you go through the clerk and the courts, not us. Her mouth tightened. You're making a mistake, she said, and when this is over, it'll be noted. She turned and stalked back to the SUV. The door slammed, and the sound shivered down the wire. Harris handed my license and card back. You got the full deed somewhere? He asked quietly. Survey, water rights paperwork, old plats? In the house, I said. My dad kept everything in his desk. I'd dig it all out, he said. If she's talking about revised boundaries, someone at the courthouse either messed up or got leaned on. You'll want every scrap of paper you can find. The younger deputy cleared his throat. So, for now? For now, Harris said, meeting my eyes. I see a man at the gate of a ranch his name is all over. I don't see probable cause for trespass. You can go in, Mr. Cole. Just keep it calm. No shouting over fences. Let the paper do the talking. Paper's what I do best, I said. One of his eyebrows lifted a fraction, but he didn't ask what I meant. The deputies walked back to their cruisers. One by one, the light bars went dark. The night sounds swelled back. The insects, the wind, the distant cattle. Bethany's SUV lingered a moment, then reversed, turned toward the neat rows of Silver Creek houses, and rolled away, trailing dust. I climbed back into my truck and sat for a moment, watching my gate in the headlights. The wood was gray and weathered, the paint on the sign peeling, but it looked more solid than anything that had just happened. I eased the truck into gear and rolled forward until the bumper nearly kissed the gate. As I reached out the window to lift the latch, the question settled in my chest, colder than the wind. How could an HOA claim ownership over a ranch that stood long before their pretty little subdivision ever touched Wyoming dirt? The latch lifted with a scrape of old metal, the kind my grandfather never got around to oiling. I pushed the gate open, drove through, and closed it behind me out of habit. Something drilled into me since I was 10. Keep the gate closed. Wind steals cattle faster than thieves. The lane felt narrower than I remembered, the cottonwoods taller, their branches scratching at the sky as I rolled past. Headlights washed over the dark shapes of fence rails, the dusty outline of the old tractor, the sagging barn door that never hung straight. Everything familiar, everything quiet, except for the knot in my chest that refused to loosen. Inside the house, the air smelled like cedar, worn leather, and memories that had no business hurting as much as they did tonight. I dropped my bag, washed my face in cold water, and fell into bed still wearing half my clothes. Exhaustion finally won. When dawn broke, the world outside my window glowed the way only Wyoming mornings do. Thin gold light stretching across frost-tipped grass, dust hanging low like mist. I stepped out onto the porch with a cup of coffee and breathed in the cold air. That's when I froze. Bright orange paper clung to every surface within reach. Gate posts, porch rails, mailbox, even a fence picket 20 yards out. Notices slapped and fluttered in the wind like warning flags. 40? No, more. I set the mug down, walked to the gate, and pried the first sheet off. HOA violation, Category 3. Below that, big block letters, excessive driveway dust. The next one, unauthorized livestock near shared access corridor. Then fence material non-compliant. Then improper landscape aesthetic. Then unregistered agricultural equipment visible from common viewpoint. I stared at that one for a long second, eyes drifting toward the old green tractor my grandfather rebuilt in the 70s. It had sat in the same spot since before Silver Creek even had roads. I walked the length of the porch. 39 notices in total. Everyone printed neatly, stamped with Silver Creek Estates HOA, and signed with Bethany Reed's looping, overconfident handwriting. I crushed one sheet in my fist. The paper crackled like dry leaves. She must have been out here half the night, measuring, photographing, sticking her stickers on anything that caught her eye. My property, my porch, my land. If I'd been awake, she would have had to walk past the window where the old dog used to sleep. Back then, he'd have barked loud enough to wake the dead. And me. A gust of wind hit the house, rattling the boards. Something inside me rattled with it. The anger wasn't sharp, not like last night. It was dull, heavy, spreading slowly like cold water soaking into denim. Whatever this was, it wasn't normal HOA nonsense. This was deliberate, personal. I picked up all 39 sheets, stacked them neatly, and tucked them under my arm. Then I headed toward the fence line where Silver Creek's manicured lawns touched the scruff of my pasture. Bethany was already there. She stood at the property line with a stainless steel travel mug, looking freshly blow-dried and somehow too bright for the morning. Her pink blazer practically glowed in the early light. She smiled when she saw me, as if watching a man sift violation notices off his own land was her idea of sunrise entertainment. "Good morning, Mr. Cole," she called. I stopped 5 yards away. "You must have had a late night." She shrugged lightly. "I take community standards seriously, and Silver Creek has invested significant funds maintaining a certain aesthetic. Your ranch doesn't align with that." "My ranch isn't part of Silver Creek," I said. Oh, but it is. She opened the red leather folder in her hand and pulled out a document printed on heavy paper. She held it up between two manicured fingers. The revised Silver Creek boundary map, filed with the county clerk 4 months ago. She unfolded it and pointed at a thick red line slicing across the land like a knife. This, she said sweetly, is now the official boundary of Silver Creek Estates. It includes the roadway, the gate access corridor, and a buffer zone intended for future safety easements, which, she fluttered her fingers toward the ranch, now overlaps with portions of your property. That map's wrong, I said flatly. Not according to the county, she answered, tapping the stamp in the corner. Everything here is properly recorded. I studied the map. The red boundary line did cut into part of my land, 2 acres near the road, maybe more. Enough to give them leverage. Enough to let them pretend my driveway was part of their common access. This land has been in my family for 70 years, I said. My father paid taxes on every inch. My grandfather before him. Yes, well, she said, smiling with pity she didn't mean. Times change. Silver Creek is growing. We can't be held back by old parcels or outdated property lines. I looked up sharply. Old parcels? She held the map out to me. As of now, your gate sits on HOA property. Any access to or from your ranch will require compliance with our bylaws. Dust control, approved fencing, visual standards, things of that nature. I didn't take the map. Instead, I let out a long breath, watching it fog in the cold air. You know this isn't legal. Well, she said, lifting the folder, you're free to appeal, though I doubt you'll find anyone at the county willing to overturn a properly filed boundary amendment. They understand the importance of our development. There it was, the first glimpse of what Marcus would later call the pattern. The subtle claim that the county, the clerk, the surveyors, and the HOA all held hands behind shiny doors. You've made a mistake, I said quietly. Bethany tilted her head. The only mistake would be ignoring your violations. And I wouldn't want that, for you. She turned on her heel, walked back across the grass, and climbed into her white SUV. As the engine started, her window rolled down just an inch. One more thing, she said. There's a deadline. Resolve all violations within 72 hours, or Silver Creek will move forward with enforcement. The SUV rolled away, tires humming on pavement. Dust rose behind it like a veil. I stood there in the cold wind, violation notices under my arm, anger slowly hardening into something sharper than outrage, something closer to resolve. How did Silver Creek get their hands on a map showing property lines that never existed? I looked back at the ranch, my ranch, and felt the ground steady beneath my boots. Whatever this was, I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The wind picked up across the pasture, brushing cold fingers through the dry grass. I headed toward the barn to drop the stack of violation notices on my workbench before they blew away again. The old barn door groaned as I pulled it open, hinges complaining the way they had my entire childhood. Dust motes drifted in the slanted morning light, and for a moment, I wished everything inside this place could give me the answers I needed. But paper ghosts from the past wouldn't explain what Silver Creek was doing. A voice carried over the fence line. You got yourself a mess already, Remy? I turned to see Marcus Hale leaning on the top rail of his pasture fence. He wore a canvas jacket stained with years of work, a hat bent in all the right places, and a look that said he'd seen this kind of trouble more than once. Morning, Marcus, I said, walking toward him. You're up early. Didn't sleep much, he replied. Word travels fast when sheriff's lights hit your gate at midnight. Of course it did. Out here, a single cruiser passing your house was enough to get talked about for days. 2 cruisers blocking a ranch road? That'd be the morning's headline in half the county already. He nodded toward the orange pages under my arm. That from Bethany? All 39 of them, I said. Dust, fences, livestock. She worked hard for these. Marcus let out a low whistle. That's more than she slapped on the Johnsons last spring. And they had an unpermitted shed. This isn't about violations, I said. She showed me a new map, claims the HOA owns the road to my gate. Marcus rubbed his jaw, eyes narrowing. She used that trick on me 2 years back. Claimed her architectural committee had jurisdiction over my driveway. My driveway. Didn't get far, but it wasn't for lack of trying. What stopped her? I asked. He looked out over his pasture. My cousin on the county board, and the fact that I yelled loud enough at the clerk's office to wake the dead. I doubted yelling would help me here, not when whoever signed Bethany's map had stamped it without blinking. Marcus sighed. She's been pushing that boundary nonsense for a while now. Folks who stand up to her either get fined into a hole or end up selling to some developer she's sweet on. Seen it happen more times than I care to count. Older ranchers, I guessed. Older, sick, widowed, anyone she thinks she can corner. His eyes hardened. Remy, she's not just playing HOA president. She's playing land chess. I leaned my elbows on the fence rail beside him. What's the end game? He shrugged, eyes tracking a hawk circling above us. Something big. I don't know what, but it's tied to land and water. Always is. The breeze carried the faint smell of alfalfa, and for a moment, the only sounds were the creak of the fence and cattle moving somewhere in Marcus's pasture. Then a car door slammed behind us. A small sedan rolled up the lane between our ranches, bouncing slightly in the ruts. The engine shut off, and Sarah Mitchell stepped out. She looked out of place among the dust and fence lines, gray scrubs from her shift at the clinic, hair pulled back tight, eyes tired in a way that didn't have anything to do with work. She walked toward us, clutching a folder to her chest like it might blow away. Remy, I heard what happened last night. Marcus said you needed to see this. Morning, Sarah, Marcus greeted softly. You all right? She shook her head, swallowing. My driveway was declared non-compliant yesterday. They stuck a notice on my front door saying the HOA will fine me $200 per day until I remove it. That driveway's been there since before Silver Creek existed, I said. I know, she said. My dad poured the concrete himself, but Bethany said it encroaches on a future walking path they want to build. There's no walking path planned, Marcus said. She made that up. That's what I told her, Sarah whispered. She just smiled and said people who fight the HOA typically regret it. She opened her folder with shaking hands and held out a stack of printed emails. Remy, you know rules better than anyone. Look at this. They told me my home might qualify for forfeiture review if I don't comply. I read the header. HOA violation escalation notice. The wording was vague, but the intent was clear. Pressure her until she broke. My anger from last night simmered up again, hotter this time, sharper. I handed the papers back to her. You're not losing your home. Marcus isn't losing his pasture. And I'm not losing this ranch. Sarah's voice trembled. Bethany acts like she owns the county. She doesn't, I said calmly, but she thinks she can scare people into believing she does. Scaring's worked so far, Marcus muttered. Folks are tired, Remy. Tired of fighting her. Tired of fines. Tired of letters arriving every other day. Sarah nodded slowly. Nobody has ever pushed back hard enough. Not with real evidence. Then maybe it's time someone did, I said. The wind carried our words across the pasture the way it always does. Quiet, steady, like the land itself was listening. Sarah looked down at her hands. There's something else. I didn't know who to tell, but last week I saw 2 men measuring the side of your property. They had clipboards. One of them wore a Silver Creek polo. I stiffened. Where exactly? By the creek bend, near your old water turnout valve. My blood went cold. Water rights. They were looking at my water rights. Marcus cursed under his breath. She's moving faster than I thought. Sarah's voice cracked. Remy, I don't want trouble. I just didn't want you blindsided. You did the right thing, I said. And whatever's coming, Marcus added, you won't be standing alone. The three of us stood at the fence line as the morning light brightened across the plains. A small dust devil spun in the distance, tossing bits of straw into the air. It faded as quickly as it appeared, a reminder that things out here could shift without warning. But some things, some people, didn't shift so easily. I folded my arms and studied the faint path toward Silver Creek, where neat lawns cut sharp lines against open land that wasn't theirs. Why was this HOA so desperate for ground they'd never owned? The answer wasn't on the surface. It was deeper, older. And whatever it was, Bethany Reed didn't want anyone asking questions. But questions were all I had now. That night, the wind changed. Out on the high plains, you can feel when something shifts. Just a small tremble in the air, a colder edge slipping in under the door frames. By sunset, the sky had turned a bruised purple. Clouds moved fast and low, dragging long shadows over the pasture. I walked the length of the fence with a lantern in hand, checking latches and boards like my father did every evening. The cattle were restless, bunching near the cottonwoods. Even the horses kept tossing their heads, sensing something building in the dark. When I made it back to the porch, the horizon was nothing but a dim line of dying light. The house creaked as the wind pushed against its old bones. I went inside, grabbed a plate of leftovers, and had just sat down when a strange sound cut through the night. A sputtering cough, metal on metal, echoing from somewhere near the creek. My fork froze midair. The irrigation pump. I stood slowly. Pumps don't cough unless something's wrong, unless debris blocking the flow or someone tampered with the valve. I grabbed my coat, a flashlight, and stepped out into the cold. Gravel shifted under my boots as I crossed the yard, the wind clawing at the edges of my jacket. The pump house sat half a mile away, beyond the cottonwoods and down the slope toward the spillway. With every step, that choking sound grew weaker until it stopped altogether. The sudden silence hit harder than the wind. I reached the creek bank and flicked the flashlight on. The beam cut across rippling water and mud, sweeping toward the wooden pump shed perched near the spillway. Something was off. The usual hum of machinery was gone, replaced by a low gurgle. I pushed open the shed door. The pump sat dead. Lights off. No vibration. Nothing. I knelt and checked the intake gauge. 0 pressure. That only happens when the upstream gate is closed. A cold anger crept up my spine. Someone had cut the water. I swung the flashlight toward the spillway. The concrete path leading down to it was damp, freshly damp. Footprints dotted the wet surface, pressed deep like someone had been hauling something heavy. I followed the prints. When I reached the edge of the spillway gate, the beam landed on thick metal chains wrapped around the handle, 3 loops, padlocked tight. I touched the chain. Cold, recently placed. The water pooled behind the gate, pushed against the barrier, straining to get through. The air smelled different, stagnant, wrong. I ran my hand along the metal surface. This hadn't happened by accident. Someone had come out here. Someone who knew exactly where this gate was. Who knew it controlled irrigation for half my acreage. I crouched low, scanning the mud for tire tracks or boot patterns. A set of footprints led back up the slope. Heavy, deep, 1 foot turning slightly outward. Maybe a work boot. Maybe someone trying to disguise their stride. Either way, no rancher in Wyoming would ever chain shut another man's water gate. Not unless he wanted a fight that lasted generations. I pulled out my phone to take pictures. Chains, padlock, footprints, spillway, water level. Document everything. Out here, paper was power, but photos were ammunition. As I snapped the last photo, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text appeared across the screen. Stop resisting. Water is only the beginning. A chill rolled up my back. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't respond. The wind howled across the creek, rattling the reeds. I took a long breath, letting the cold steady me. Panic wasn't going to fix this. Neither would anger. I stood and looked at the chained gate again. Someone wanted to send a message. Something calculated. Quiet. Just enough to cause damage without leaving evidence. I walked back to the pump shed. The flashlight beam skimmed across the walls, catching small flecks of mud at the threshold. Whoever came here was in a hurry. Mud smeared where they'd bumped the frame. A tiny scrape on the door where a tool must have hit the metal. Clumsy work. Almost like they weren't used to doing their own dirty labor. I traced the print with my thumb. It wasn't big enough to be Marcus. Too small. Too narrow. And the outturned foot. I'd seen that gate recently. Back at the HOA meeting last month, when Bethany paraded that new security contractor across the clubhouse patio. A man in tan tactical pants who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Could be him. Could be someone else she had on a leash. I turned off the flashlight and let my eyes adjust to the dark. Clouds scudded across the moon, shadows stretching over the fields. My boots sank into the soft earth as I followed the trail back toward home. Every few steps, I glanced behind me. Out here at night, the prairie has a way of making a man feel watched, even when no one is there. But tonight, it wasn't imagination. Halfway up the slope, I stopped. Lights flickered in the distance. Warm amber squares from windows inside Silver Creek. Neat rows of houses lined up like soldiers, roofs glinting under the rising moon. Perfect, polished, untouched by the wind and grit of real Wyoming life. And somewhere behind one of those windows, I knew someone was waiting for my reaction. Waiting to see if I broke. Waiting to see if I'd run. But they didn't know me. Didn't know this land. Didn't know my father. I reached the yard and climbed onto the porch. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer audacity of what they'd done. Water is everything out here. Chaining a man's gate was a move older than any HOA. Something ranchers did in old feuds that lasted generations. Something dangerous. Not because of violence, but because of what it meant. It meant war. I wiped the mud off my flashlight, hung my coat on the hook, and stepped inside. The house was quiet. Still. Holding its breath the way I was. Someone out there thought they understood power. Thought they could carve up land, water, and people the way they carved up HOA lots. They didn't know the first thing about real ownership. I sat at the kitchen table, pulled out the violation notices, and spread them across the wood like cards in a hand I didn't want, but was damn well going to play. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't look. I didn't need to. I already knew the rules had changed. The house was silent, except for the ticking of the old pendulum clock on the wall. My father's, repaired twice, stubborn as the man who kept it running. Outside, the wind rattled the windows in their frames, sending faint drafts through the cracks of this century-old place. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I wasn't drinking it for warmth anymore. I was drinking it to stay awake, to keep my mind sharp. I drew in a slow breath and pushed the stack of notices aside. This wasn't a rancher's problem anymore. This wasn't about fences or cattle or a few inches of dust on a driveway. It wasn't even about a chained water gate. This was about power, and power was my department. I stood and walked to the barn office, a converted storage room my father never understood but let me keep. A place with insulation, a sturdy desk, a space heater, and the only room on the property with modern wiring. When I flicked the lights on, the bulbs buzzed, then glowed warm. The barn smelled of oil, hay, and faint sawdust. Familiar, steadying. I sat at the desk and opened the laptop I rarely brought home. It booted with a quiet hum, the logo reflecting faintly in the dusty window behind me. A pop-up greeted me with my secure work portal. Simple white text, nothing flashy, nothing that would ever hint at what it really controlled. National HOA Oversight Bureau, Senior Compliance Division. My login still worked. Of course it did. I was still officially on vacation, not inactive. I opened a new case file, named it Silver Creek Estates, Preliminary Review. Then I started pulling threads. First, property maps. I downloaded county plats from 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Then I placed them side by side on the screen. The differences were immediate. The old plats showed my ranch line straight as a ruler running parallel to the creek. The newer ones showed a bulge, an odd, unnatural curve where the Silver Creek boundary pushed into my acreage. A revision, filed 4 months ago. The same one Bethany had waved at me like a royal decree. But the more I zoomed in, the more obvious the problem became. The revision wasn't consistent with the original survey markers. Someone had redrawn the line without moving a single physical marker on the ground. Impossible. My stomach tightened. If the county clerk signed off on this, either they missed the error, or someone leaned on them to ignore it. Next, foreclosure records. I searched for every property Silver Creek had foreclosed on in the past 10 years. 14 homes, 14 families forced out for non-compliance, delinquent fines, or structural infractions. And where did the houses end up? 12 were sold to companies tied to the same developer. 2 were bought by an LLC whose mailing address matched a law firm representing Silver Creek. A pattern. Clean on paper, dirty underneath. I rubbed my forehead, the screen light burning behind my eyes. This wasn't a rogue HOA president. This was a pipeline. Fines to foreclosure, foreclosure to acquisition, acquisition to profit. Silver Creek wasn't a neighborhood. It was a machine. And now it wanted my land. I clicked through the last foreclosure entry. Grazing strip violation. 2.3 acres seized. Marcus's place. They'd taken part of his pasture last year. He hadn't told me. Probably didn't want to sound paranoid, or didn't want to remember. I leaned back in my chair, the barn filling with the hum of the heater. Outside, the wind shoved against the walls again, as though it wanted in on the conversation. Next, water rights. I reached up and pulled an old binder off the shelf. Green leather, cracked at the spine. My father's water rights folder. He kept it updated meticulously, because out here water meant life. Inside were decades of paperwork, purchase records, flow allowances, seasonal diversion permits, and the long, coiled history of who controlled which trickle of the creek. I found what I needed. The original 1954 water rights deed, signed by my grandfather, stamped by the county, recorded under state law. It granted Cole Ranch permanent diversion rights as long as the land was used for agricultural purposes. Those rights extended to the spillway and irrigation valve someone had chained shut last night. No HOA, no subdivision, no future revision. Nothing could override that without state court action, and Silver Creek had none. They'd gone after the one thing that legally could not be touched. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated campaign. I turned on the small desk lamp, casting a warm, golden light across the documents. The barn felt smaller now, tighter, full of tension rather than hay and tools. I dug deeper. Silver Creek's annual reports, fee schedules, architectural approvals, bylaws, all public, all intentionally dense, the kind of paperwork designed to make people give up reading after page 2. But I didn't give up. I'd built a career reading worse. 2 hours passed. 3. By the 4th hour, a picture had formed, clear enough to make my hands still on the keyboard. Silver Creek HOA had amended boundaries without proper county signatures, acquired property through questionable fines, funneled foreclosures to private holdings, misapplied environmental hazards to force compliance, filed at least 3 complaints to the county about dust and livestock nuisance from my property before I even arrived. They'd been planning this, waiting for the right moment to strike. The barn lights flickered as another gust hit. I checked the time, 3:17 a.m. Too late to sleep, too early for coffee. I stood, stretching stiff legs, and stepped outside. The sky was black except for a faint streak of silver over the mountains. The grass near the barn swayed like something alive. The air held that quiet tension Wyoming always gets right before dawn. I walked to the fence and rested my arms on the rail, staring toward Silver Creek. Their porch lights twinkled like stars stuck in the wrong sky. "Who are you working for?" I muttered. As if on cue, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. Another message from the same unknown number. "TikTok, rancher. We're not done." I looked up at the moonlight glinting off the locked spillway far down the slope. Maybe not. But neither was I. By the time the sun crept over the ridgeline, the chill of the night had settled deep in my bones. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that comes not from lack of sleep, but from knowledge, when the truth of a thing finally shows its teeth. I'd seen enough in the county files, the HOA reports, and the water deeds to know Silver Creek wasn't just meddling, they were maneuvering. So when an email pinged my phone just after dawn, subject, emergency, HOA meeting, I didn't need to read more to understand exactly what Bethany Reed planned to do. She was going on a fence. I took a long shower, shaved, put on clean jeans and a denim shirt, and walked outside into a cold that slapped me awake. The ranch looked the same as always, golden brush, fence rails catching the early light, the old windmill creaking as it turned. But something in the air is different. It felt like the land itself was bracing. By mid-morning, trucks and SUVs were crawling toward the Silver Creek community barn like ants toward a dropped piece of food. Residents stepped out in pressed jeans, walking shoes, expensive jackets that didn't belong anywhere near dust or livestock. They gathered in small clusters, murmuring, glancing toward my ranch, as though I might erupt from the sagebrush with a wildfire. I parked my truck near the barn's back entrance. The building was newer than anything else on this side of the valley. Fresh timber beams, steel roof, wide sliding doors. Inside it smelled of sawdust, coffee, and fear. Rows of folding chairs faced a projector screen. HOA board members sat at a long table up front, papers fanned out like a stack of accusations. Bethany Reed stood in the center, the pink blazer brighter than ever, confidence radiating from her like the heat from a branding iron. When she saw me walk in, her smile sharpened. "Mr. Cole?" she said, projecting her voice across the room. "Glad you could join us. We were just about to begin." I found an empty seat near the back. Though the term empty was loose, people shifted away subtly, not wanting to be caught in whatever hurricane Bethany was preparing to unleash. She tapped the remote. The screen flickered to life. A photo of my ranch gate appeared, dust swirling, hinges crooked, sign peeling. "Let's start with this," she said. "A clear violation of Silver Creek's aesthetic ordinance. A murmur rose in the room. She clicked again. A photo of cattle near my fence line. Unauthorized livestock within visual range of community property. Another click. A photo of puddles left from irrigating the pasture days earlier. Environmental hazards and potential water runoff contamination. And another click. A close-up of the old tractor outside my barn. Unapproved equipment displayed in common view. Each photo drew another wave of whispers. I could feel the tension building in the walls, pushing against the timber beams. Bethany clasped her hands together. This is not about punishing a newcomer. It's about protecting our investment, our homes, our families, our property values. Silver Creek cannot thrive with deteriorating views or unsafe neighboring practices. I rose slowly. That tractor belonged to my grandfather. It belongs out of sight, she cut in. Preferably behind a compliant structure. And the puddles? Evidence of water misuse, she answered. And the cattle? Livestock of any kind must be shielded from community view. It's in our covenants. I exhaled. Bethany, my ranch predates Silver Creek by half a century. She smiled sweetly. Not anymore. With dramatic flair, she reached into her red leather folder and pulled out a document, holding it up like a priest offering scripture. This, she said, is a notarized easement deed signed by Mr. Cole's late father. It clearly states that the access road, gate corridor, and adjacent land buffer were surrendered to the HOA for maintenance and safety control. My breath stilled. She passed copies to the board, then to the crowd. There it was, my father's name, scrawled across the bottom in ink as black as the night someone forged it. She turned back to the room. The signature is valid. The notary stamp is valid. The record predates most of Silver Creek's original construction, which means this ranch is subject to our governance. Someone gasped. Someone else muttered a curse under their breath. I stared at the document. The paper was fresh, too fresh, and the signature, though similar, was off by just enough. My father looped his L's differently. There was no mistaking that. Bethany, sensing the weight of her moment, folded her hands and addressed the room. Given these violations and this deed, the board may vote today to condemn the non-compliant structures and issue mandatory remediation orders, including removal of the gate and any agricultural features that fail to meet our standards. The crowd buzzed louder, uneasy now. Perfect. Fear was a fickle thing. It shifted with the wind. I stepped into the aisle. Bethany, I said calmly, may I see that deed? Of course, she said, handing over a copy with smug theatricality. Take all the time you need. I walked closer to the projector so everyone could see me. The paper trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the insult of what was printed on it. I held it up. This is a forgery. She laughed lightly. How predictable. I kept my voice level. My father was deployed overseas the year this was supposedly signed. Murmurs swept the room. I pointed at the notary stamp. And this notary wasn't licensed until 6 years after the signature date. Gasps this time, louder. Bethany's smile faltered. I looked at the board members. If you file action based on this, you will be complicit. Forgery is a felony, boundary fraud is a felony, and using falsified documents to seize land. Enough! Bethany's voice cracked like a whip, sharper than before. You're twisting facts. We verified that document. With who? I asked. The same clerk who filed a boundary revision that contradicts 20 years of surveys. Silence. A heavy one. The kind that wraps around a room like barbed wire. Before she could respond, the barn doors creaked open. Heads turned. Sheriff Harris stepped inside, hat in hand, eyes scanning the room. Dust clung to his boots. His expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. Bethany, he said, voice steady. We need to talk. Her face drained of color. He walked forward slowly, like a man carrying news no one wanted to hear. About what? She asked, trying to regain her composure. The sheriff held up a sealed envelope. County markings. Thick, official, undeniable. About this. A ripple went through the room. Bethany stared at it, her lips tightening, fingers twitching as if she wanted to snatch it away or tear it apart. But she didn't, and she couldn't. Something in that envelope had the power to stop her cold, and everyone in the barn felt it. Sheriff Harris didn't rush. He walked with the slow, deliberate steps of a man who had seen too much and was weighing every word before he spoke it. Dust clung to the hem of his jeans, and when he stopped beside Bethany, even the projector's hum seemed to go quiet. He lifted the envelope slightly. This came from the county auditor's office, he said, marked urgent. Bethany swallowed hard. Whatever it is, I'm sure it's... He cut her off gently, but firmly. I don't think you're sure of anything right now, Ms. Reed. The room shifted. Chairs creaked. Boots scuffed. People leaned forward. Even the board members, normally stiff-backed and expressionless, looked uneasy. Sheriff? I asked. Mind telling us what that is? He nodded once, then addressed the entire room. This envelope contains preliminary findings regarding Silver Creek's boundary revision, the filing dates, and the notarized deeds used to support those filings. The words landed like a hammer. Several residents exchanged wide-eyed looks. Bethany's voice sharpened. That boundary revision was properly recorded. We followed every... Enough! Harris didn't raise his voice, but the authority in it stopped her cold. This isn't the place for you to get ahead of the facts. He looked at me, then at the crowd. Before I open this, I need everyone here to remember something. The land doesn't lie, but paperwork can, and it's our job to figure out which one we're dealing with. A shiver threaded through the barn. The truth was peeking through the cracks, trying to find daylight. Harris broke the seal and pulled out several sheets of paper. He scanned them quietly. His jaw tightened. The muscles in his neck did too. Then he exhaled, long and slow. Sheriff? A woman in the second row asked. Is something wrong? He folded the papers carefully, then turned toward the crowd. The county auditor found inconsistencies, he said. Major ones. Bethany stiffened. That's impossible. Our filings were reviewed by a clerk, Harris said bluntly. Not the auditor, not the board, and definitely not anyone trained to spot fraud. Murmurs rippled across the barn, fear in some voices, relief in others. I watched Bethany closely. Her eyes darted to the door, then to the board, then back to the sheriff. A fox caught between traps. Harris continued. According to this report, the revised boundary map was submitted using a notary stamp belonging to someone who was not licensed at the time of the signature. A gasp shot through the room. He held up another page. And the deed showing Mr. Cole's father surrendering easement rights. He tapped the paper with 2 fingers. The file metadata shows it was created last year, not in the year printed at the bottom. Now the room erupted. People whispered fiercely, others hissed. Some pointed at Bethany as if they'd suspected her all along. Bethany's mask cracked. Sheriff, you don't understand. He cut her off again. I understand enough to know this meeting isn't proceeding until we get clarity. I stepped forward, holding my own copy of the forged deed. If anyone in this room still doubts what's going on, let me add one more fact. My father was deployed overseas the year this document claims he signed away our land. A man in the front row muttered, My God. And this notary stamp? I said, tapping it. The person who owns it didn't even apply for her license until 6 years later. The room thundered with disbelief. Bethany took a step backward, her breath quickening. This is a misunderstanding. The clerk must have filed the wrong version. Someone mixed up documents. It happens. Not like this, Harris said. Not this clean. Not this coordinated. A woman near the aisle stood abruptly. Is that why my driveway was declared illegal last month? So you could force me into a sale? Another man rose, voice shaking with anger. Bethany, is that why you hounded the Parkers out of their home? Lied about their septic tank being a hazard? People began talking at once, anger building like a storm. The barn seemed to shrink under their voices. Bethany lifted her hands. Everyone calm down! You're forgetting who's in charge here! But they weren't. And she wasn't. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough that everyone had to listen. Bethany, you said my father willingly gave up part of our ranch. You stood there and claimed this document was real. It is real, she snapped, trembling. No, I said softly. It's not. Her eyes twitched. She wasn't breathing evenly anymore. And you knew it, I added. That was when everything snapped. Her composure broke like a fence rail in a stampede. You don't understand what's at stake, she burst out. This community deserves better than a rundown ranch dragging down values. People want development. They want amenities. They want honesty, I said. Something in her eyes flickered. Insecurity, fear, something brittle as glass. Then the sheriff stepped between us, holding the envelope like a badge. We're done here, he declared. This meeting is suspended pending further investigation. No votes, no enforcement. Not today. Bethany's voice cracked into a hiss. You can't override the HOA. I'm not overriding anything, Harris replied. I'm enforcing the law. You should try it sometime. The crowd erupted into quiet cheers, subdued at first, then louder. Relief rippled through the room like water flowing after a long drought. For a moment, the tension in the barn loosened. People exchanged glances filled with something I hadn't seen since I arrived. Hope. But hope alone wasn't enough. When the sheriff turned to me, his expression had changed. It was heavier, more serious. Mr. Cole, he said quietly, I need to speak to you outside. Now. The room stilled again. Another twist. Another secret. And I had a feeling this one cut deeper than forged documents. I followed him through the barn doors into the cold Wyoming air. The door shut behind us with a hollow wooden thud that seemed to shake loose the warmth inside. Outside, the wind swept across the open field, carrying bits of straw and dust in lazy spirals. The sky had dimmed to that late afternoon gold Wyoming gets before sunset. Beautiful, but holding a quiet edge, like a knife laid flat. Sheriff Harris walked a few yards away from the barn, boots crunching on gravel. He didn't speak at first. He just stared out toward the line of cottonwoods along my property, hands on his hips, the envelope still clutched tight in one hand. When he finally drew in a deep breath, I knew this wasn't going to be small talk. I figured you should hear this without a crowd, he said. About the envelope? I asked. About a lot more than that. He turned to face me fully. The easy confidence he'd carried inside the barn was gone, replaced by something heavier, like he had been holding this in for years. You're not imagining it, he said quietly. Silver Creek isn't acting alone. They've been working with a developer group for a long time, one that wants a whole stretch of land along this valley. The ranching parts, the river access, the water rights. The wind blew harder, rustling the grass at our feet. Why? I asked. He hesitated. Tourism project, luxury cabins, private fishing access, something they're calling a vista expansion. All smoke and mirrors, but it comes with money, big money, enough to get certain county folks leaning the wrong way. I felt my shoulders stiffen. And the HOA? Leveraging fines, violations, pressure. They make ranchers miserable until they sell. The developer buys the land cheap. The HOA gets kickbacks through fake maintenance contracts. He lowered his voice. Been happening quiet-like for years. My jaw clenched. Marcus, the Parkers, Sarah, and now me. Why haven't you stopped it? I asked. He didn't flinch. Because I never had proof. Rumors don't stand up in court, and nobody wanted to stick their neck out. Folks were scared. Board members, clerks, even deputies. He paused. Bethany's good at intimidation. I looked at him steadily. And you? A faint, tired smile. I'm too old to be intimidated. But I'm not stupid either. If I moved too soon without anything concrete, the county board would have thrown me out. So what changed? He lifted the folded auditor's report. This, and you. I frowned. Me? You stirred up the hornets, he said plainly. You walked in with documents, dates, actual knowledge. You saw what they forged and how they did it. He stepped closer. And let's be honest, Remy. You're the first one they've messed with who knows the law better than they do. The breeze flattened the corners of the papers in his hand. He exhaled heavily. There's something else. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a second envelope. This one, older, creased, a faint stain across one corner. What's that? I asked. County audit files, he said. Historical ones. I requested them last week after hearing from Marcus about those men measuring your creek line. Didn't expect to get anything back this soon. He handed it to me. Inside were pages stapled together, scanned documents, old check images, transaction records. My eyes flicked across the headers. Silver Creek Maintenance Fund Disbursement Log Foreclosed Property Transfer Report. Some lines were highlighted. Others were circled in red ink. And beside them, handwritten notes from the auditor. Suspicious vendor. Repeated payments with no service documentation. Parcel acquisition linked to same LLC. Boundary revision submitted without board vote. It was all there. Patterns that weren't mistakes. Patterns that were intentional. Water. Land. Acquisition. This connects them to the developer? I asked. Directly, Harris said. At least 2 of the foreclosed homes ended up in the hands of a holding company tied to the same group proposing that Vista expansion. He looked me square in the eyes. They want your river frontage, Remy, and your water rights. That spillway of yours? That's their jackpot. My stomach went cold. I remembered the footprints near the spillway last night. The chains. The text message. Stop resisting. Water is only the beginning. Whoever chained that gate, I said slowly, knew exactly what they were doing. He nodded once. Someone on the inside. Someone Bethany trusts. A gust of wind swept across the open pasture, carrying the distant sound of a dog barking, a screen door slamming somewhere in the subdivision. I closed the envelope. So where do we go from here? That depends, he said quietly. What are you willing to do? I met his gaze. Whatever it takes. He studied me for a long moment. Then he nodded. Good, he said. Because the county board is meeting in 2 days. If these documents hold up, this is big enough to bring in state oversight. Maybe even federal. I didn't react outwardly, but inside a cord tightened. Federal oversight. National investigation. Something I knew better than anyone in this valley. But he didn't know that. Not yet. He started walking back toward the barn, but paused halfway and turned. One more thing. Keep your cameras up. Don't trust anyone from Silver Creek. And for God's sake, don't go near that spillway alone again. I won't, I said. Not without proof running. He gave a short nod and pushed the barn door open. Inside, voices still buzzed, Residents demanding answers, board members shrinking under their questions, Bethany trying to regain her footing like a performer after tripping under a spotlight. I stayed outside for a moment longer. The wind brushed against the grass. Light flickered through the cracks in the barn wall. Somewhere down the slope, water pressed against a chained gate that had no right to be closed. I tightened my grip on the envelope. For years, I whispered to the empty field, you pushed people who couldn't fight back. I looked toward Silver Creek's neat houses, their porch lights glowing like false stars. Now you pushed the wrong man. The words hung in the cold evening air, not as a threat, but as a promise. A quiet one, steady, inevitable. The kind Wyoming men keep. By the time I walked back into the barn, the room had fractured into tense pockets of whispers. Board members huddled near the projector, eyes darting like cornered animals. Residents clustered in small knots, murmuring, arguing, some angry, some shaken, some finally daring to hope. Bethany stood alone near the front table, clutching her folder like a lifeline. Her pink blazer, so bright earlier, seemed duller now under the harsh barn lights. She shot me a look filled with pure venom, fear mixed with outrage. "Mr. Cole," she called across the room, voice straining to keep control. "You can't derail this meeting with unfounded accusations and—" "Unfounded?" I held up the forged deed. "Your notary wasn't licensed. The signature date doesn't match reality. And your boundary map contradicts 20 years of filings. That's not—" "And," I added, cutting her off, "your water contractor was trespassing on my property last night." She froze. The crowd stilled too. I stepped closer, my boots echoing on the wooden floor. "You didn't think the cameras would catch him, did you?" A ripple went through the room. Cameras, recording, evidence. That was a language even HOA diehards understood. Bethany's eyes narrowed. "You're bluffing." I smiled faintly. "Bet your job on it?" Her jaw tightened. Not good enough. The truth needed weight. I took out my tablet, connected it to the projector's HDMI cable, and tapped the screen. The projector flickered. Then the barn went silent. On the screen appeared the grainy but unmistakable image of a man in tactical pants, boots turned outward, working a chain around my spillway gate. The timestamp glowed in the corner. Audio played, a faint voice urging him to hurry up before someone came. A few gasps echoed. Someone muttered, "That's her contractor." Another whispered, "I knew it." Bethany's face drained of color. "This," I said, addressing the crowd, "is a federal water diversion crime. State level at minimum. Whoever ordered it knew exactly what they were doing." A board member, a thin man with rimless glasses, raised a trembling hand. "Bethany, did you authorize this?" This is taken out of context," she stammered. "He was inspecting. We have rights to—" "No," I said coldly. "You don't." I pulled out a leather badge case and flipped it open. The gold emblem gleamed under the barn lights. National HOA Oversight Bureau, Senior Compliance Advisor. Gasps filled the room. Someone whispered, "Is that real?" Another said, "Oh, Lord." Bethany stumbled back a step. You said you worked construction consulting." "I said I was on vacation," I replied. "You assumed the rest." Murmurs erupted, some relieved, some bewildered, others furious at being deceived by their own HOA leadership. I held up a second document, larger, stamped in red. "Per federal authority," I said, "the Silver Creek Estates HOA charter is officially suspended pending a full investigation. All enforcement actions are void. All fines frozen. All planned condemnations halted." The crowd erupted. Some cheered, a desperate, exhausted sound. Others demanded answers. A few shouted at the board members. Bethany tried to raise her voice, but the noise swallowed her words. Panic rose in her eyes. Then, sirens. Not the short chirp of patrol cars, but the long, rolling wail of incoming county units. They grew louder, tires crunching on the gravel road outside. Red and blue lights flashed through the barn slats like lightning. The crowd fell into uneasy silence. Bethany's confident smile flickered back onto her face, brittle and broken around the edges. "See?" she whispered sharply. "You've pushed too far. You're the one who's going to be removed from this meeting." But her voice quivered, and she was wrong. Sheriff Harris stepped through the barn doors with 2 deputies, his hat low, his gaze steady. "This meeting," he announced, "is over." Bethany strode toward him, hand raised. "Sheriff, arrest him. He hacked our records. He threatened the board. Harris held up a hand. "Ms. Reed, don't speak unless you want to make this worse. I demand, enough." He turned to the deputies. "Secure the boardroom records, all of them. Tablets, laptops, files. Bag everything." Gasps and protests erupted from the HOA table. Bethany lunged forward. "You can't take those. HOA documents are private." "Not when fraud is involved," Harris said flatly. He turned to me. "Mr. Cole, do you have the footage and copies of the forged documents?" "Yes, sir," I said. "Good. I'll need to collect statements shortly." Behind him, the deputies were already moving, confident, calm, not rushed. They knew exactly what they were there for. Bethany's voice cracked. "Sheriff, you are making a grave mistake." "No," he said, looking at her with tired eyes. "I'm finally correcting one." She staggered backward, her pink blazer catching the projector's glow like a fading flame. A resident, Sarah Mitchell, stepped forward. "Sheriff, what happens now?" Harris glanced around the room. "Now, we let the state sort this out. And from what I've seen already, this HOA's leadership won't be running much of anything for a long time." The barn filled with stunned silence. Then relief spread, slow at first, then building like dawn across the plains. People hugged. Some cried. Others stood frozen, trying to process the shift in the world they woke up in that morning. Bethany stared at me with hatred that had nowhere left to land. "You think you've won?" she whispered. I met her gaze evenly. "I think the truth won." Her lips twisted. "This isn't over." But behind her, the deputies closed in around the board table, and the sirens outside had grown silent, settled, resolved, final. For the first time since setting foot on this ranch, I felt the air ease around me. A small victory. But it wasn't over. Not yet. Because holding an HOA accountable was one thing. Unraveling a developer scheme that stretched across counties? That was another war entirely. For a long moment after the barn emptied, I just stood there, hands on my hips, breath visible in the cooling twilight, listening to the echo of voices fade out across the pasture. The wind carried the last bits of dust through the open doorway. Inside, chairs sat crooked, papers strewn, the projector humming to itself like it didn't know the battle was over. Not the whole war, just this front. Sheriff Harris and his deputies had taken the board members aside, bagged the documents, and escorted Bethany out the back door before the crowd gathered outside could swarm her. She didn't go in cuffs, not yet, but the look in her eyes said she felt them anyway. Every step she took looked heavier, like her shoes had turned to concrete. I stepped outside, into the amber glow of the barn's exterior lights. Residents stood in small circles, voices hushed, some relieved, some shaken, all stunned. Sarah Mitchell walked past me, clutching her coat tight, and gave a faint nod that said more than words could. Marcus Hale approached too, a deep-lined worry softening into something like hope. "Didn't think anyone would ever stand up to him," he said quietly. "You did," I replied. "You warned me." He shrugged. Warning ain't the same as fighting. It's where fighting starts. He looked down at the ground, then toward the ridge past my ranch. You think this is over? No, I said honestly. But the tide turned today. The wind shifted again, cooler, carrying the scent of the river far below. A reminder of what they'd tried to take, what they still might try. One crisis was ending. The next was beginning. 2 days later, the county board held an emergency session. By then, the evidence was undeniable. Fraud, forged deeds, illegal filings, coordinated land grabs. It spread through town like wildfire. Neighbors showing up with their own stories, their own suspicions, some with old letters, others with decades of receipts. The board didn't stand a chance under the weight of all that truth. Silver Creek's charter was officially suspended. Enforcement stopped. Fines frozen. Hearings canceled. Even the developer's Vista expansion project was halted pending state review. Their lawyers stormed out of the courthouse, briefcases flapping like angry crows. And Bethany? A week later, she resigned for personal reasons, though everyone knew she didn't jump. She was pushed hard. Her treasurer stepped down immediately after. The surveyor? Cooperating with the investigation to save himself. It didn't take long before county investigators traced the forged documents back to a private office inside Silver Creek's HOA suite. The same suite where Bethany had hosted her monthly leadership coffees, smiling over pastries while quietly lining up the next foreclosure target. But the real fall came when subpoenas rolled in for the developer group. When state inspectors found irregularities in funding, when someone leaked emails showing coordination between board members and the holding companies purchasing foreclosed ranch parcels. It wasn't just a scheme. It was a machine. And machines don't fall gracefully. They collapse in sparks. 3 weeks later, Silver Creek Estates was dissolved. The sign at the front entrance, a big metal monument with polished river stones, was bulldozed by order of the county after residents voted unanimously to remove it. The clang of steel hitting the ground echoed across the subdivision like a bell tolling for the end of an era. For the first time in years, people let lawn ornaments return to their front yards. Kids chalked drawings on the driveways without fear of fines. Dogs barked without anonymous complaints landing in mailboxes. Life, messy, normal, human, returned. And those wrongfully fined? Their money was refunded. Those whose land was seized? Restored. Marcus got his grazing strip back. Sarah kept her house. The Parkers, long gone but not forgotten, received a public apology and a settlement that would help them rebuild elsewhere. As for my ranch, I drove up to the fence after the last county vehicle left and leaned on the rail as the sun lowered over the high plains. The grass swayed in long waves. The air was clean, sharp, the way Wyoming always smelled after a storm blew through and scrubbed everything bare. Peace. Real peace. Not the fragile kind. I breathed it in. And then my phone buzzed. I almost ignored it, thinking it was the sheriff or a neighbor. But when I glanced down, the number was unfamiliar. Not blocked, just out of state. Colorado. The message read, "Mr. Cole, we heard what you did in Silver Creek. We need help. Our HOA just fenced off our only water access." A second message followed immediately. "Please. They won't listen to us. They said it's community beautification. But we know what it really is." I stared at the phone, hearing the wind hiss through the grass, carrying the smell of sage and sun-baked soil. The mountains stood purple in the distance, watching like old guardians. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly. Trouble never ends. Not for ranchers, not for landowners, not for anyone who holds something someone else wants. But helping good people fight back? There's purpose in that. Purpose worth the dust, the long nights, the battles fought in barns and courthouses alike. I pocketed the phone, rested both hands on the fence, and let a quiet smile tug at the corner of my mouth. A new war, I murmured to myself. All right then. Behind me, the ranch lights flicked on, warm and steady against the approaching dusk. Justice wasn't a single battle. It was a trail you kept riding, and I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. If you've ever stood your ground for what's yours, drop a simple yes in the comments, or type justice if you've dealt with an HOA that pushed too far. Out here, we learn that land remembers every honest fight and every quiet act of courage. And if these stories speak to you, I'd be glad to have you stick around. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next ride down this long road toward real hard-earned justice.